Hi, everyone. I think we're live
It's off to a great start.
after like the lights come up on stage and nobody's there.
We just
Um,
slowly enter.
coming out from under the curtain.
Is it
Um, yeah. Welcome to Brunch with ECOS. This is the panel on improvisation, improv theater, and I'm Jeff Gladstone. I'm moderating the panel today. Would like to acknowledge that this panel is being hosted on the traditional, ancestral, unceded territories, stolen land of the Coast Salish people, the Musqueam, the Tsleil-Waututh, and the Squamish peoples. So grateful to live, work, and play on this land. And thank you so much for letting us be here. We have a great panel of guests today. I would love you to introduce yourselves and maybe share just a bit about your experience with improv. And we have a wide range of experiences. So yeah, whatever that is. And I'll go last. Okay, Paige, would you go first?
Hi, my name is Paige Fraser. My pronouns are she, her. I started doing improv, but besides from, I think a lot of people play a lot of theater games and improv style short form games to get into theater when they're little youngins. But I started getting more competitively into improv when I hit high school in grade 9, and I did the whole Canadian Improv Games CIG circuit for 4 years, 1 year as a junior, 3 years as a senior, playing with a wonderful team of people led by our coach, Lori Maisie on Vancouver Island. Shout out GP Vanier. And during that time, I went to improv camp. And while I don't do improv like I used to, like in a team or short form, long form, that sort of style. I bring a lot of what I've learned from improv into my work and try to keep that kind of spontaneity and the elements of listening and teamwork that I think I've brought into my work.
That's fantastic. Thanks so much, Paige. Corey.
Hi, my name is Corey Hawes, he, him. I was thinking, I think I did do improv in high school, but I think because of funding cuts, it only lasted 1 year. Because it was like an elective, I think, or something. So that was kind of my entry point. And I've always been fascinated by comedy. And of course, in theater school, we've done some improv. But I really kind of got into more performance improv about 4 years ago when I was in London. Shout out to Hoopla Impro, Maria Peters, great teacher in London. But really, what I took a liking to and what I am fascinated about is how to bring long form into rehearsals and theater when I direct, and that's been a bit of a research project of mine on my own time. And I love doing improv. I don't perform as much as some of you here, but I find it a really fascinating art form, especially for actors, the really underutilized art form in training and stuff.
That's great. Thank you, Corey. Thank you. Camille.
Hello, I'm Camille Legg. I go by she, they. Improv started for me, same as Paige. I did CIGs in high school. I started in grade 10 and it was amazing. And I did it until I graduated in grade 12. And then during that time, I also performed with Instant Theater. And then I went to theater school and I stopped doing improv for a while. And then upon graduating theater school, like 4 years ago, I've started like getting back into it again, doing shows with or training with Blind Tiger and doing shows with friends.
That's fantastic. Thanks, Camille. So glad you guys are all here. What a great group. I'm Jeff Gladstone, and I have my background in improv is I grew up in Calgary, Alberta, where I joined the Loose Moose Theater Company, which was the theater company where the format theater sports originated, and some other formats, Maestro and Gorilla, And man, Keith Johnstone, who wrote a book called Impro, and there's a great biography on him here. Hey, there, you got that one. Nice. Perversion.
Oh, that's a good one. The Improv Handbook.
I was ready to go.
I know. I brought my books too.
Yeah,
so that's where I learned. I'm also involved now in a group called the International Theater Sports Institute, which is an international organization that manages the licenses for theater sports, Maestro and Gorilla. And I wanted to share, I'm going to put it in the chat here, and maybe someone could share this on Facebook, but the ITI website is impro.global. And we have a Vimeo page if you follow the links up top. And we thought if there's anyone out there who's interested or would like to hear a different perspective on improv, there's a great panel that was hosted by John Carr, who's the artistic director of Dad's Garage Impro in Atlanta. And also Coco Galore, who's the artistic director of Bad Dog in Toronto, and Ashley Farrell, who's an improviser in Vancouver, called Black Improviser Empowerment. And it's amazing panel and discussion about being a Black improviser and how improv communities and companies can and need to do better to be more inclusive and diverse on their stages. So anyway, if you're interested in that, we wanted to share that because it's a great panel, some great info to check out now or after if you'd like to stay tuned in with us too. The link is there. Okay, so does everyone have a coffee or a tea?
A tea. I love it.
Good, nice. Cheers. We're keeping this conversation really open. We welcome questions at any time from anyone viewing out there. So please do let us know if you have any thoughts or questions for the panel. I'm going to start out. I thought a great question for us to address is why is improv so scary? I know I've heard a lot of my theater friends who work in theater. They're amazing theater actors, but they're like, improv terrifies me. For myself, I learned impro and theater at the same time, so they've always been an integrated thing, and it's hard for me to separate them in my mind. So I find it an interesting question. I thought maybe someone could answer that. Why, for theater artists, why is improv so scary, terrifying?
Yeah, I think like there's just no backup plan if things go wrong, you know. It's all on you and it's all on your teammates. But I think that's what makes it so much fun, like so exciting. You know, I've heard people say like excitement, I don't know, like excitement and fear are actually like the same sensation. It's just classifying it differently. So sometimes I've definitely felt like super scared before an improv show, but I try to think of it as like, this is so exciting. Like we have no idea what's going to happen, and living in that space. But I think just not having a backup plan brings a lot of fear to people, and especially being in front of a lot of people and not having a backup plan.
It requires an intense amount of letting go, which I think as actors, not everyone, but we like knowing where we're going and we like knowing what we're doing, and it's called blocking for a reason. We learn lines for a reason. I think in improv, we have to be so vulnerable, but at the same time, it opens up such a dimension for creativity and imagination. That restriction of not knowing just opens up what could happen, what might happen. And to me, that's exciting. It's fear in the moment, but once you're in there and you're listening to everyone that's on stage with you, you're really connecting. That's human connection 101. It's the dream of what you wish you could see on stage anytime. And I'm sure, you know, in improv, sometimes that doesn't happen. We don't listen or whatnot, but that's the goal. And I think that's, you know, on stage, if I'm watching a play, I just want to see two people interacting with each other and not knowing what's about to happen.
Yeah.
That's great.
To add on, just from when I started improv, I was so afraid of failure and this concept of crashing and burning, that I know, at least definitely for the first year that I was doing improv, I was kind of that person that like stayed back. and was like, I'm going to go when I feel safe, when I feel like I know exactly what I'm going to do. But it was the reclassification of that in my mind, of how failure is kind of the goal, and failure could be where you discover like the best thing, like the golden moment that you were looking for. And I think it's something that I keep learning, that discomfort and failure can be a great teacher and a great indicator that something amazing is about to happen. But I know as a young person who is so like self-conscious and afraid, it was a lot of that about being embarrassed and doing something wrong, and then realizing that wrong is exactly what we're going for, kind of, in a lot of these forms.
Totally. Yeah, I know like Keith talks a lot about the state of how we are, right? That, and his belief is like the education system played a huge part in conditioning us to be anxious about failure, right? That if you make a mistake, you fail. You know, if you get one question wrong, you don't, you know, and that gets taught to us. Like babies are kind of like bouncing off walls, and they fall and they get up. They're actually quite resilient, but we kind of get trained. You know, and so so I agree. Like to me, I've always thought like the first part of training any improviser is dealing with the fear, and I like acknowledging the fear, and then working to change our relationship to it. Like, as Keith says, like you can't learn how to ride a bike without falling off a few times. So like failing is literally making mistakes is how we learn.
Yeah, I mean, failing in this.
I'm worried about it.
I was just going to say, failing in this context is what? Is nothing. You know, it's who cares? It's fun. Yeah. People are going to laugh in the end anyways. There's nothing great than a joke falling flat, or an improv falling flat, and everyone caught on that how absurd that joke was. Totally. And people are like, oh, that was so great how bad that was, you know, and we all get up and go home. It's a good type of fear, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah, I like that. I think absolutely. This is so great. I had a list of like topics, but it's like we've covered 90% of them, and just
Great. Thanks for watching, everyone.
Yeah, thank you for tuning in.
Okay, here's a question for you. Here's something that I find really interesting. So about the process of learning, I'd love to just get your thoughts on the process of learning. At the Loose Moose Theater, where I learned improv, the way is that it was a volunteer-based company. So they would do a free 1-hour class before the shows every night. So to join the company, you volunteer. So you'd work box office, concession, you'd mop the stage. You'd get a free class, and then you could go on stage, and then you'd stick around for notes after. So the way I learned improv was kind of like jumping in with these 1-hour classes, doing these every week, doing a class, doing a show, getting the feedback, coming back, going again. Since then, of course, all these improv schools have started, and a lot of improv schools are kind of built on, okay, you take level 1 and you learn these things, and then you go to level 2 and you learn these things. Then you go to level 3 and you can now go on stage, right? So I'd be interested in hearing from your own personal kind of growth, now that we've talked about the beginning and the fear, like how your growth, and when we're talking about improv, this is included in theater and in rehearsal, but I'd just be interested in hearing your thoughts about that, and maybe even how it applies to how we learn theater too. I've always thought of it as like learning improv, instead of like a ladder that you climb rung by rung, it's like a big plateau, just like this vast plateau where there's like these little hills where you go, oh my God, I've like learned something. And then it's like back to just this like endless plateau of experimenting. Yeah. Anyone can jump in there if you have thoughts on that to share.
Yeah,
I would.
Yeah.
No, go to me.
Yeah, I guess I was trained in a way that was similar to what you're describing, Jeff, with theater school, as well as improv in high school, of not having an audience there. And sometimes I do appreciate my training, but I kind of wish the audience was always a part of it, because it becomes a big deal now when I have an audience, you know, and I feel like that's just an integral part of like performance, your relationship with the audience. And I think that should be personally like incorporated more into training, that it's, you know, this is just a part of it and it's not a big deal, and you can still, you know, have the foundations and have an audience there and just get used to that. And I also learned, like, again, with theater school and improv, the like steps, you know, of who are you, where are you, what's the problem, raise stakes, solve the problem, like these steps you have to hit. And same with like acting, all the things you have to break down. But I remember coming out of theater school and then doing an intro class with Blind Tiger. And I thought it was fascinating to me because they were focusing on just having fun. Like they were just getting people to have fun, and just seeing like the joy of people who had not done any sort of like theatrical training. I was like, oh yeah, this is why I do this. You know, like I get so intellectual about this, but really it comes down to just having a good time and going with your impulses that way. So I hope in future training that's incorporated more of like audience, as well as just like having a good time, like making that a really integral part of growing as a performing artist.
I think that's great. I think that's great. Yeah, you hit on a few things actually I'd like to get into. Feel free to jump in, you guys, but I love that I'm really interested in the relationship with the audience and how audience trains us. Yeah. Unless someone wants to jump in on that, I'd love to actually maybe just even follow that. Corey.
I just wanted to jump back to your previous question, but also a couple of things Camille mentioned. I think, you know, play is so at the center of any theater. I would hope it's called a play for a reason. And I think that is something we can learn from improv. And my training was kind of similar in terms of performance improv. Was, you know, level one, you learn the foundations, and then you can break the foundations as long as you know the foundations, right? The rules are meant to be broken, but you have to understand it, you have to have an understanding of the rules. And I think that's something in theater school too that you're not taught, is that, you know, these things that you're taught, they're one person's view of them, they're one person's opinion of them, gone through, you know, years of different people working with this idea down. So everyone's got their own take. And so you take what you like, and then you don't need to use all of it. As long as you have an understanding of the basis of it, then you can let go and have fun and break the rules and really enjoy your time. And like to me, my training, I was the only person, you know, with any type of performance background. There were doctors, businessmen, businesswomen, you know, nurses, people who have never been on a stage, and they're effing brilliant. Like they have no care. They're just here to just let go, and the relationship to the audience is that they feel this rush that we are used to. And we tend to forget that also. This relates back to this relationship to the audience, to connect all of it. It's a living, breathing thing. You know, we need to feed off of that. And it's a direct conversation with the audience. We rely so intently on laughs in improv and kind of comedic improv. But even if it's not comedy, there's an energy that needs, there's a kind of current that goes between audience and performer that I think is so important to capitalize on, because the performance is created between the two entities, on stage and off stage, right? And I think that's absolutely invaluable.
I love that. Thanks, Corey. Yeah. Did you want to add to that, Paige?
Yeah, I'm really driving with this idea lately about how important the audience is as another character in the scene with you. There's only so much, I think, rehearsing and practicing in a classroom kind of setting you can do. And then that moment you get in front of an audience and you go, there it is. And you get that little like extra spark and you're like, okay. Yeah. And I like what you said about that energy, and sometimes it's laugh, but also it's that extra intent listening.
Yeah.
and you can feel that, and you can like
Totally.
sense of okay, something I'm saying isn't working because I can feel that they're not listening or they're not buying what I'm selling. So, and what I really love about improv, and when you are playing in those forms and breaking those forms, you're allowed to comment on it. Not even a directly like, no one's listening thing, but you can comment on what you're doing directly in the moment and go like, I think they're not with me here, so I'm going to go somewhere else. And that's okay. And I think bringing that kind of attention from a more classical improv world into theater spaces and plays, and how I interact with audiences when I'm in scripted shows has been super important. And that kind of awareness of, okay, my audience isn't listening to how I'm doing this, so how am I going to talk to them to get them on my side? I think that's something that improv has always taught me and really instilled. I'm not sure if this was exactly what you're talking about, Jeff, but I love this idea of, I think improv just gets right in there because it's so, it is so connected.
Yeah. Yeah.
It breaks that fourth wall that is created in Western theater, which is such a shame because you lose that, that energy, that connection.
Are we all having a moment to think about all the audience?
Yeah, we're all like, yeah.
Like that connection, that shared experience.
Yeah. Keith he talks a lot about how improv often leans towards the comedic and sometimes the stupid. And, he says like, and one of the things is that laughter in the audience, like it's addictive when you get laughter, right? And it's something you can hear and respond to. But there's, as you all kind of pointed out, there's other ways the audience is responding, the ways that they're listening that we can attune to and be aware of. One of the things Keith always said, he's like, when people's hair on their arms stood on end, like when they got chills or something really moved them, and if the hair when it stood up made like a crinkling sound, he's like, improvisation would probably look very different because people would hear that sound and there'd be a whole style that was like aiming for that sound.
Wow.
And so I find it interesting, right, that I'd be interested to hear you all speak about like other ways that we get feedback from an audience, subtle ways. Like you've talked about hearing, like I love the feeling of like you can hear them hearing the play, you can hear them listening, and when they don't listen, like you'd feel that something missing. There's also like the moment when everyone is, when the audience is shifting a little bit, and then there's moments where you go, no one is shifting. You can feel that, you can feel everyone kind of lean forward in their seats a bit.
I was going to say crying and booing, but then you said subtle, so I'm going to take that back.
Crying, booing, throwing fruit. Yeah.
Really get a certain energy from that.
Let's see, a gasp, like that, like not like a, but like that quiet little like that kind of, when you hear a few of that going around in an audience, I think that's one of my favorite things to hear and to feel on stage, going like, oh, I surprised them.
Yeah.
And I feel like I remember my coach in high school saying, when we went to tournaments, saying like, be careful how you respond to people. Don't respond because you want them to know you're there. Respond honestly. And that's really fed how I've been an audience member at improv shows as well as other. Just because, like when you've been watching a scene and it's like they're about to kiss or something and everyone goes, "Aww," and like that kind of sound. And I feel like you can feel that as a performer going like, oh, there's my friends in the audience. And I think that's, once again, I think I've gone on a side tangent, but I feel like you can also feel when you're in the audience or when you are that audience member who like sees a friend on stage do something great and you're like, I want to let them know they're doing a great job. And it's maybe not necessarily because of the work, but it's because of like a personal thing. That one's not as subtle, but I like a small gasp. That's
Small gasp, a small intake of breath.
Yeah. I think you touched on this, Jeff, of just like that silence.
Mm-hmm.
You know, when something happens and it's like dead silent. And like, it feels like everyone is in that moment of what just happened. And I used to get kind of scared by that. I was like, is everyone okay? But now I'm like, no, this is good. You know, people are feeling something and reacting. But I think I definitely get, like, that's something I have to work on as a performer, because I'm always like, validate me, like, laugh at me, like, I want to hear you or something. But just to know that people are with you in silence. And sometimes that's like the best reaction.
Yeah.
Mm. Yeah, and there's something so powerful in long form anyways when you have certain structures that have a through line or a root scene that goes through the whole hour-long show or 40-minute show, where you're able as performers to build a relationship with someone else on stage and a story. Mm-hmm. And every time you come back to that root scene or that thematic scene, people want to know what's going to happen next, and they slightly lean forward until, you know, and then that moment when the lights get turned off at the end, and it's like you held them, you know, in your hand, and they want more. You know, you can tell that they want to know how the story ends, but the improv is over. I think those moments of silence, of flight shifting, are so powerful.
Yeah, I don't think I've ever seen, like, honestly, an improv scene that's not comedic. Probably in movies, actually. I'm sure there's a lot of you know, acting books talk about like this moment was improvised or whatever, and they're usually like the best moments of that movie.
Yes.
Yeah. There's
a lot of famous examples, like Midnight Cowboy, I think, Dustin Hoffman, where they're walking across the street and there's a car comes in and he bangs on the hood. He's like, I'm walking here.
Oh yeah. And Taxi with like Robert De Niro.
Yeah.
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 There's
Huh?
Fresh Prince of Bel-Air. There's that episode where Will Smith, it's right after his dad has him again, and he has that beautiful monologue where he like talks about what he's going to grow up to be, and he ends the monologue off by talking to his uncle, whose name I forget.
Uncle Phil?
Sorry?
Phil.
My
uncle Phil.
Goes out, why doesn't he want me, man? And it's just heartbreaking. Mm-hmm. And it just perfectly like, and I know that that's also taken a lot from like Will Smith's experience, but like the bravery to take that forward and to like add that on and have that great, perfect button. I can't imagine that scene any other way.
What's so great about that is that the circumstances were so strong that he was able to then connect to his own life, and you don't need a script because it comes so naturally. There's a great show. There's a lot of TV shows that are improvised, actually. There's a great show on Netflix called Easy. And I really recommend it because every season there's like 6 or 7 episodes, and each episode has a different set of characters or group of characters, and they have one episode kind of each per season, but the whole show is improvised. And there's some like really intense discussions, and like, you know, they're just kind of outlines, but then it's all, because the situation is so strong, you get these incredible moments between two characters, two actors, and it's really cool. I really recommend that. And some of it's funny, but some of it's really not.
Yeah.
And I really recommend that.
Yeah, it's super naturalistic, like almost spookily naturalistic. I'm like, oh, that's my life. Yeah.
Oh,
I think also. Sorry?
I want to see that.
Oh, yeah.
I had no idea that was improvised.
Yeah, I also saw like Blue is, it's a problem, the director is problematic, but Blue is the Warmest Color, I think, was also improvised. This like French film that follows this relationship between these two women. And they would just have the circumstances, they would just have the kind of environment, and then they would have the actresses improvise within that. And it was so moving, just so real. There's like this scene where she's, I think it has to be, it's so real. She's like crying and she starts eating a chocolate bar and is like eating and crying at the same time. And I'm like, if that ain't me.
it all connects to like those bases of improv, of setting
Yeah.
up the situation
Yeah.
and the conflict and the characters, you know, those first three rules that you start any scene with, like who are you, where are you, and what are you doing? And then it just like flows. And that's the interesting parallel there, is like once you have that base, you can do whatever you want because it just comes out. And that's like improv right there.
Well, I'm finding it interesting, like really all acting, theater and film is the art of recreating spontaneity.
Yeah.
You know, like theater is like trying to show a moment that looks spontaneous, that looks like it's happening in real time. And really, you know, and I mean, anyone could speak to this, but like that, in a way, like all acting technique is trying to create that feeling. So it's interesting. That's why I find it so interesting. There's all these stories about these famous lines in movies. Like I say, it's always like the best part where it is actually spontaneous, you know?
Mm.
And then as a side thing, I'd love to follow up too, something Corey brought up about doing an improv class, and there's nurses and teachers and people from all walks of life, which is something, as someone who works in theater and improv, I've always loved, is that some of the best improvisers I know have no acting training, no theater background. They just came to it from a total side thing, and they're some of the best improvisers I know. And I've always found it a really interesting question. It's like they seem to be so connected in what they are, but yet there also seems to be, anyway, if anyone could speak to that or has thoughts on that, like.
Yeah, I think about that a lot, honestly. I always wonder what kind of actor I was before theater school. And I'm so grateful and I appreciate theater school so much, but man, I never had a second guess about anything I did, you know? And sometimes
Yeah.
I feel like I'm trying to get back to that. And when I see people from different walks of life discover improv, I'm like, oh, that's what I used to have of just that like pure joy and inhibition. And I think there's like technique comes with like a slight cost of like now knowing what you're doing and being able to analyze what you're doing. And sometimes, yeah, I have a friend who's just a freaking brilliant improviser, and she is not an actor at all, but she just goes with whatever her impulse is and doesn't have a second thought about it and doesn't think of it very seriously. And I think that's such a gift that I'm constantly trying to get back to.
There's a connection too with what Jeff, you were saying about this recreation of spontaneity. I think that someone who doesn't do theater, one, they have so much lived experience that isn't spent trying to recreate something that has maybe happened to someone else, a character or whatnot. Yeah. They can just use their lived experience, but they're not bogged down by this need to, you know, I wish, for me anyways, when I direct, I wish theater, I don't want it to be the same every night, because it's not exciting to me, you know? That's why I keep mentioning the situation, but if the situation is strong, whatever happens within that situation, that's the truth, that's the core. And if it's different every night, that's great, because people change all the time. And I think those two combinations are two of the things that make non-professional actors or non-performers so good at improv, is they're not bogged down by one, this recreation of spontaneity, and this amount of lived experience that they can bring into their improv.
Yes, that's great. I came across this quote of Keith's the other day, which I love too. One of his sayings is like, "Be average."
I love that.
Is one of his things, right? And it's like he said another quote too, like he's like, when you do your best, or when you're trying to do your best, we have tension, we have anxiety, we have pressure on ourselves. Usually like the joy goes away. It's like we're really showing the effort, right? He's like, when you see like a mountain climber doing their best, it means they're in trouble. And it's the same with improvisers, right? And then there was this great thing I saw where he's like, when I say like be average, he's like, what I'm really trying to say is like, be yourself. He's like, but telling someone to be yourself is like telling an anxious person to relax. It's just make them more tense, right? It's like, be yourself. Well, who am I? What is myself, right? But I love it, and what you're speaking to, Corey, the idea that, to be an improviser, to be spontaneous, it's like bring your whole self, your lived experience, your whole self. It's all you need. Mm-hmm. And it's not easy to do.
Mm-hmm.
I'm a super anxious person, and I'm going to bring that anxiety into it, whether I like it or not. It's happening.
Yeah, I one of the best notes I received from an improv teacher was like, what's your sense of humor? What's your perspective? Yeah. Like bring that in. And like with anxiety too, like that's for me, whenever I see like, I don't know, someone bringing that on stage, I'm like, yes, I feel you. Thank you. This is so good. This is hilarious. So yeah, I always try to think of like, okay, what's my perspective on this? Like, what's my sense of humor?
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Your own sense of humor. I think that's so important.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that brings us to actually like another improv core concept that I see as like a core concept, which is what Keith calls inspire your partner. And it's something when I teach improv, I always go back to this because I think it's such a key thing, is that most people, when we come into improv or they're starting, right, all in our head and like thinking about how we come across, or what am I going to say? Am I going to like reveal something too personal? Am I going to say the wrong thing? And what I say going to be funny enough, right? And but when we put the focus on another person, and it's like, okay, I'm in a scene with you. I want to know what you like, what you're interested in, and I want to become an expert at like feeding you stuff that you want to do, characters you want to play, right? And the first step for that, I find, is like having people share and be honest about what their interests are. And I find it amazing how often in improv class, and often it's experienced improvisers who I'll be like, what's your favorite kind of book or movie? And there's a lot of like experienced who's like, no one's ever asked them what they like. That it's like the idea that improv is about getting an idea from the audience and doing that like what I like, what I'm interested in, what I'm afraid of, what I'm curious about is not part of the improv thing. Whereas to me, it's like, that's all it is, and that, yeah. So I just love that about like getting to know what people are curious about, interested in, and trying to feed that to people on stage.
Yeah, and I feel like you can tell, like there's certain actors or improvisers in town that I'm like, I feel like we'd be really good friends. But like, I've never like talked to them, but they bring themselves so much, that I'm like, oh, I see your sense of humor, or I see your interest.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. Great. Any other thoughts, comments? We're just kind of jumping around here, but
I like a side comment just about this idea about inspire your partner. Just like maybe this is a weird thought in my brain. Maybe it is. Maybe it isn't. But inspiring and expiring is also part of the breath. And I think inspiring, this idea of inspiring breathing in your partner in all those ways and making them like this very important part of your world, is literally like all you have in an improv scene is like the other person that you're with, if you are lucky to be with someone else. Once again, flipping that over into theater, I think, scripted theater, and like that, this idea of breathing in and being inspired and taking that from the person you're on stage with. That was just really started percolating in my brain as I heard that.
That's also a great scene to just have someone try to breathe in the other person, the whole scene. Mm-hmm. Just sniffing at them. I think I'd like to see that scene played out.
I want to see that scene. Okay, I'm going to just throw some like popcorn questions out there. Does improv gets no respect from the legitimate theater community? True or false thoughts on that?
I wonder if it comes from fear and not understanding it.
Yeah, I think when I've received a little bit of judgment for being an improviser, it's like it means I'm just way too silly or something, like not serious, not grounded, not real, over the top.
It's like a high art, low art question.
Yeah.
We think theater is this high art and improv is low, but man, it's such a shame to like reduce those to those binaries. Improv is incredibly difficult.
Yeah.
In fact, I think you could become a good actor if you're trained as an improviser. I think all the tools are there to become a kick-ass actor. And yeah, I get that sense too, that I think too, it's the overwhelming idea that improv is comedy, which, don't get me wrong, I love comedy, and I think comedy gets a bad rap a lot of the time, entertainment and comedy, which is also a shame.
Yeah.
And theater is this like serious thing, but I could show you some theater that is not serious in the least, and improv that is really heartbreaking. So it's such a shame to reduce these things into these binaries, unfortunately.
Yeah.
I see them incredibly connected.
Totally.
Like
immensely.
It doesn't make sense to me when they get divided and kind of forced to choose one or the other, which is kind of what I did.
Yeah, I read this book on comedy that was like talking about how comedy all comes from pain. Like understanding that, like really understanding pain or having experienced it. And I thought that was really interesting because I feel like, there's some great comedic actors who are...
Comedy is tragedy, take it further.
Sorry?
One more time?
Sorry, there's a major lag. I didn't want to interrupt. I just said comedy is tragedy, just taken one step further.
Yeah, right? Totally. Exactly.
I love that. Okay, here's a question. What are the limits? This is something I've been exploring in my own work for years, since the beginning. What are the limits of what you can do improvisationally in a scripted play? I know, like, I've gone into shows where I've worked with a director who's, I'm like, every time we do the scene, I change my blocking, not for the sake of changing the blocking, but just in an effort to be so present with my fellow actor that any little kind of subtle differences, try to respond to those. And I've worked with some directors, said, great, you can change your blocking every night, you can do whatever you want here. And the lighting designer is like, probably hates us, but they like the scene to give us that freedom. Now, but I also found that I found it interesting that like as the scene grew, it didn't maybe grow in the way that other scenes do and I kind of found like, okay, when you actually have set blocking and you stick to that, there's other subtle ways that you can find that creative freedom, but the scene grows in a different way because you're not constantly, reinventing the formula or changing the context. So I don't know, I'm just always interested, like, how far can you go? Can you go too far working on a scripted play and bringing in improvisation? If an audience responds and you respond, I've definitely responded to audiences outside kind of the scene and to the point where I've been like, okay, that was too far. Like, you have to actually just ignore them or try to ignore them. So interested in your thoughts on that. If you've ever gone too far, or if you have thoughts on like, is there limits to what you can explore in scripted in terms of being spontaneous, present?
I was in a show once that it went a bit out of hand. Like, it was encouraged that we could improvise, but I think we lost the story at times because we just lost kind of what we were doing. But I think maybe if those foundations were built in more of what is the story we're telling, and then maybe being allowed to improvise on top of that, maybe that would have been more effective. but I usually allow a bit of freedom of, exactly what the audience is giving me. If I'm playing a part that's directly talking to the audience, I want that to be like a living thing and an in the moment thing. And I usually try to trust, like within rehearsal and dress rehearsal and like opening of like, I'll be trying different things, and I kind of trust my director to be like, hey, that was too much, you know? But usually I've gotten like positive feedback of whenever I'm spontaneous, but I try not to lose the story.
Yeah,
Glad you bring that up. That's so key, I think, right? Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, Paige.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, I think I think the moments that maybe I've gone too far in one direction or not is because I've either lost the story and it's become something like, when it's come out of the story, it's come out of what I'm doing in the character work, and it's more about like something else. And I don't know if that's ego or not, whether that's in a rehearsal or a show. But the moments that I've been most satisfied have been when I felt like it served the story and what we're trying to say. Even when that's gone a little bit more, like more off than not, but it's serving what we walked into the theater to do and what story we came in to tell. I think if you keep that at the center of things. Yeah.
That's great.
Yeah, I was going to say too, in rehearsals, it's a great way to find ways to connect to whatever the story is you're trying to tell to your personal self. I think this gets lost a lot. We were trained a lot in North America in kind of Stanislavski technique and analyzing the text and stuff. But what a lot of people don't know is that Stanislavski himself used a lot of improv in the later part of his career in translations that never made it to America because of the Russian censorship. And one of those methods is called active analysis, which is all about reading the script or reading the scene and then improvising the scene and then talking about it and then reading it, improvising it, reading it, improvising it. So slowly the words of the script will enter your body, but until then you're using your own words. So you're effectively appropriating, maybe the wrong term, but appropriating the story for yourself as an actor and you know, using yourself, not necessarily, you know, all about the crying and stuff, which is the early Stanislavski kind of what did make it to America was the method acting. But this idea that you are completely, in a way, connecting your lived experience to what is being said. And I think then doing that in rehearsal, then that energy comes out in performance where you might not need to improvise as much because it's so alight in you. And that's the nerdy moment for the discussion today.
I love it.
Bring the nerdy moments in.
Yes. You brought up Stanislavski. It's like, it feels like we've reached some pinnacle. I love that. Okay, here's a question, something Paige said that made me think of a question, which is about audience members. So in my training in improv, one of the first things that we were taught is like how to treat an audience member, how to bring an audience member up on stage, how to work with them on stage, how to bring them back to their seat. And basically, you know, there were some tools and tips that are very helpful. Like, only take someone who is making eye contact, right? If you go to the audience and they look away, don't bring them up. Don't bring up people on stage who are too enthusiastic, you know? Because people are like, I want to do, right? It's like, sometimes it can just be a disaster. Don't, you know, if someone is like, bring up, you know, points to their friend, bring up the person who's pointing. They're the one who actually like wants to be on stage. Don't bring it up, right? Help them onto the stage, right? So anyway, these little tools and tips, but I find like in theater, there's a lot of kind of improv things that are getting, you know, co-opted into theater show. Things like One Man, Two Governors, where they do audience interactions. And, you know, and I've been involved in theater shows where there's going to be an audience bringing an audience member up, and just seeing people kind of like having to reinvent the wheel about how do we bring people up, how do we find people, how do we get them up. And so I'd be interested if anyone has any thoughts on what things about improv can be helpful for theater in how to treat and use audience volunteers. And if you have any experience with that, or any thoughts to share on that.
I think what you said of like inspiring the other person, I really I've only been in one show where I was interacting with the audience and like bringing them, not necessarily, but just like being close to them. And I want them to trust me and know it's okay. So I try to go about it with like kindness and warmth and like, I've got your back. And like, they're my number one priority now, I want this to be a good experience for them. So I try to just like take care of them as much as I can. I've seen it go, like people go about it in a way that's almost very stand-up-y, like very objective and kind of cold. But ultimately I want this like audience member to have a really great experience. So I try to just lead with like warmth and softness and kindness and make it all about them and inspire them. Yeah.
I think that's so great. And I think what you're talking about is how, you can bring up an audience member and it's pretty easy. The audience can turn on them or laugh at their expense. Mm-hmm. And it's like, I've seen people, new improvisers sometimes like fall into that, like, oh, and then they're getting laughs at the expense of the audience member. So it's like, you have to work against that. There's a pull to do that. And you have to consciously, I think, be like, no, this person is gold. And I want them to be happy and have a good time up here.
Yeah.
Muted himself.
Wait, are you pointing at me?
I was gonna say, I think that idea of treating the audience member like gold and leading with kindness. I got to play the MC in Cabaret last year, and how we started Act 2 during the overture of the second half was I would emerge through the audience and I'd have to find someone to bring onto the stage and like slow dance with and make some like jokes about that sometimes changed depending on who it was. And I just remember, because I didn't get to practice it until we had an audience on dress. So I spent, our 3-4 weeks of dress rehearsals and previews and shows figuring out the best ways to get someone comfortable and how to approach them and how to make it like, if there was going to be like laughing jokes, to make it more at like my expense, if anything, and make sure that they were in on the joke. And I found it also really affected my first act and how I would talk to the audience up until that point to make sure that some people were on my side. And I was already trying to figure out like, who can I go talk to later that's going to feel comfortable. And I think what Jeff, you were saying about physical indicators, like eye contact, who is that person who's a little bit more like sitting at the edge of their seat, kind of like, even if they're not jumping up ready to go, that have that kind of little thing like, oh, I think you want to be a star tonight. And then on the flip side of that, there was, in our whole run, there was twice that I got shot down, and very quickly in that moment, having to figure out how to like take that on, make some kind of joke so it's not awkward, hopefully not embarrass the person, and hopefully make it more about the fact that I was heartbroken that they didn't say yes. But I found that was a really interesting place to try and navigate of where can I make a joke? Where can we all laugh at this? And how ideally can I take that on? Can I take that on? And I think kindness and really being in tune with what's happening and consent.
Totally.
Yes. I want to argue the opposite because sorry, let me kind of contextualize. I was just in a show called The No Show, which is very heavily dependent on audience. So the first thing I think is what we've been saying is to break that fourth wall and be aware of the audience from moment one of the show, right? You're kind of scanning out, you're getting a feeling of who's into it and not. But if someone doesn't want to or is hesitant and stuff, there, to me, in my mind, and I think it's my sense of humor and stuff, there's an element of transgression that it's not a mean joke, it's like an over the top joke potentially. It like goes too far for the purpose of really going too far. There are ways to do that. I don't recommend necessarily do it all the time, but I think if you have there, as performers, we really get a feel of who the other person is and how much we can get away with it. I really feel that. I really enjoy talking to the audience and stuff. And sometimes going bigger and going transgressive is also a way that to get away with it. It feels kind of over the top, kind of buffoon-like, a really kind of buffoon style of clown. And that's one of the ways too, I think, going the opposite direction. But it's to each his own. I don't want to presume to always do that or anything like that, but it's both sides have worked for me in the past.
No, I'm glad you said that, because when I saw the no show, I remember feeling like this like so much comfortability in the audience, because I don't know, it was okay to be made fun of. So there's that side too, I guess, people's own comfortability.
Yeah, for sure. I want to look the no like N-O or K-N-O-W? N-O.
No, as in there's no show.
I love it. Okay, I definitely want to check that out. We got a couple minutes left, and I feel like there's so much more I'd love to ask you guys and chat about. Here's something, just a little nugget, which could open a whole can of worms, but which is about narrative. So one thing, like my improv work has taught me everything I know about narrative. And personally, my personal experience has been, it has nothing to do with like any kind of structure or form. In fact, what I found is like, in fact, this idea of like inspiring your partner. And when you put a person in charge of the narrative and they can say yes or no, depending on if they feel interested or pulled into the story, right? They're going, oh, I don't really like that, or I do like that. And when you see people light up with story elements, I find like, oh, wow, it has taught me so much about narrative. So, and it's something I think that gets left out in improv being about spontaneity, working with audience members. I think sometimes we forget about the lessons and the values of narrative structure, storytelling that it can teach us. Does anyone have anything to share on that? What improv has taught you about narrative and how that affects or influences your theater work?
Very briefly, I think that as an improviser, especially again in long form, the performer becomes a dramaturge of their own, because they have to kind of put the ski. No, that's a French expression. It's not going to work. Put the kind of doors to the pathway of the story. They have to have an idea of what those are, even if everything is made up within that. There's kind of you're kind of seen into the future of what are the slaloms you're going to take, if you will. There's my ski expression, and there's like a real lesson in kind of dramaturgy and narrative that if the situation is right and that you're not, striving for laughs and stuff, just in silent stuff, you have an idea of, you have control of where you can bring the story and stuff, and you kind of have to have that overview into the future of where you might navigate the story, which I think that's really taught me as a performer, an added skill in the moment of looking at the bigger picture of the scene and where it might go and having an understanding of that.
That's great. Thanks, Corey.
Yeah, I think also what I use in both theater and improv is just like objective, just having a really strong objective. And then the story can come about kind of naturally. If I just find like a primal thing that this character really wants and they have an obstacle, then it becomes really easy. I don't have to think anymore. And I feel like that goes back and forth with creating a narrative when developing a character, as well as developing a scene in improv. Like just having an objective makes it so much easier.
That's awesome. Love that. Anything to add, Paige?
Not a thing. That was lovely.
That was lovely. That was lovely. And
That was lovely.
we're at time.
Talk all day.
Yeah.
Totally. Yeah. And we will more, I'm sure. Thank you all so much for being here and sharing your thoughts and experience. Thank you, anyone out there who was listening and tuning in. Thanks, Paige and Michaela, for the Brunch with ECOS project. It's so cool, so much fun to connect with you guys in this way. Any other closing thoughts, Paige, you want to share? Am I missing anything?
Jeff, I want to thank you for coming on and moderating this one. You're the first non-Michaela or Paige moderator on this series, and I think you're just fabulous for it. So thank you for today, for doing this. And also, if anyone watching is interested about any other workshops or panels, is Corey frozen on anyone?
Corey's frozen in the best pose.
Am I?
It was perfect.
Damn it.
If anyone watching is interested, there are more workshops and panels on the Arts Club Digital website. Go to the workshops page. Do we want to end with Corey's frozen face?
Yeah.
Do we want that to end?
How do you want me to?
We all do it.
I'll do it. Do you want to end? Beautiful. Thank you so much for being here, friend.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye.
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 Oh.
Yeah.